The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Toby Manhire. This is Gone by Lunchtime, like a reunion. It's like a reunion tour. You thought it had gone, but it's back. The last time we recorded this podcast, there were dinosaurs roaming the earth.
This is like the Sex Pistols' Filthy Lucre tour, the sort of aged reunion.
Which one are you?
Who was the one who died shortly after their first flash of success? But it is. It's like. But now there's a lot. Just like when the Sex Pistols reformed, now it's just a big corporate exercise. We're here in like a flash new spin-off studio.
So our heart's not in it. We are in the new premises for the spin-off.
I went to the bathroom.
Side.
It's amazing.
The
lock on the door works.
We are so.
This is corporate spin-off.
Well, we nearly replaced Ben with Neil Finn.
Yeah, good. I see what you did.
Did you like that?
That was very good.
Thanks.
That's Annabelle Lee from the Hui. Welcome. And the other voice is Ben Thomas from Exceltium. And Alice Webb-Liddell is making everything work for us. Hi, Alice.
Hi, Alice.
And sorry it's been so long to those of you to whom that's important, Mum. Since the last podcast, our most popular participant, Waimihia Rose, has started school.
She's actually interning in Kiritapu Allen's office.
Is she?
Yeah.
Is she? Is Trevor Mallard head prefect still at that organisation?
He provides a lot of oversight in terms of the job and that. She's enjoying Wellington though. Unlike Ben, she's a fan.
So much time has passed since the last podcast. Ben Thomas has lost his hair.
It's been pretty traumatic.
When did we last pod?
It's been a long. We're actually not even called Gone by Lunchtime anymore. We're just called Gone.
It was BC. It was before child.
It was. Breaking news: Jacinda Ardern has had a baby. Emergency podcast. Gone by Lunchtime. Jacinda Ardern has created an entirely separate human. Emerged from her own body.
An entity has emerged from the Prime Minister.
Ugh.
Prime Minister.
Yeah, that was quite good actually.
Very good.
Child's name is Neve. Would have been Neville if it had been a boy. Well, we should talk about that, I suppose. Though I mean, it was all reasonably decorous. No one. The media have all behaved reasonably well in terms of
Baby's performing well.
Is the baby performing well?
Ben has some more intel on that, don't you, Ben?
No, I mean, you hear whispers. There haven't been any published polls for a long time. But the whispers that you hear about parties' internal polling is there was a pretty significant baby bump for Labour, probably even more significant than the one before the birth. It's been good for the government. Jacinda Ardern, like not only did she give birth to a beautiful child, and with all
it was beautiful. We haven't seen it for weeks. It may have gone, but sometimes they go a bit
gone to seed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying we don't know that for a fact. That's an assumption.
No, look, we're operating in a low information environment. The published pictures have been very cute. Clark acquitted himself well, and the first man in his dad cardigan or something. It was very endearing. The Prime Minister only sort of appeared once on the debut of the government's much heralded families package, cradling the child in a sort of hasty Blair Witch kind of ANCAN footage.
She used the new mother filter on Instagram.
It was all extremely relatable, extremely adorable, and even better for New Zealanders' sense of self, it garnered worldwide attention and praise from the foreign press. There is nothing New Zealanders like better than being told that we're progressive and incredible.
We love foreigners to love us, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah, and by us we mean the Prime Minister's baby, but basically our baby.
Yeah.
Pretty
the nation's
much
our
child.
baby.
It takes a village.
A village of 4 million.
What is New Zealand if not a village? Annabelle, acting Prime Minister Winston Peters. How's he gone?
Look, we've had fun, haven't we? No one's got scurvy. SIFS hasn't come and uplifted any of the kids. It's all fine. It's exactly what you'd expect when Uncle Winston is minding the kids while Mum's away.
It's funny, isn't it? Because there are some things where if you kind of write them down, like some of the Fonterra stuff and the kind of most hilarious seismic political story of recent weeks, which is the hamburger on an airplane, in which you've got New Zealand First cabinet members, including the acting Prime Minister, repudiating government policy and
the
New
national
Zealand
carrier.
And, that sort of seems like that could be quite a big deal. That could be quite a fissure, but everyone sort of seems to be going,
Well, so on the hamburger thing, because I think, this was about the Air New Zealand introduced what's it called?
Vegan
Impossible
burger.
The Impossible Burger, which is a fake meat burger that tastes a little bit like low-grade meat. New Zealand First, obviously furious about this betrayal, treason, essentially.
Yes.
True.
And then came out and praised Virgin Australia when they promoted Australian beef, missing again, as you said, the fact that Virgin Australia is an Australian airline. There's clues there if you look. Which is, it struck me as kind of the same way that Republicans in the United States now have more confidence in Vladimir Putin than they do in the Democratic Party. New Zealand First are kind of, they're looking for internal enemies in this nationalist cause. But somebody said to me, it's all been fun having Winston in there. Oh, he hasn't started any wars. And all I could think was only just barely. If you look at his performance as Prime Minister, remember it's been 4 weeks. And in that 4 weeks, he has publicly declared that Theresa May's leadership is over and there is a spill on in a country that we're just about to try and begin free trade talks with. We have been rebuked by China for the defence white paper, which identified them as an external threat in the Pacific with their expansionism.
Mild
just
rebuke.
In recent days, he is in comments that were reported widely in the Australian media. He told the Australians that they should change their flag so that it doesn't look like ours. Now, this may seem like a bit of fun to us, but this is the flag that Australians drape themselves with before they beat up immigrants on Australia Day. It means a lot to them. Let me go to my list. He also prevaricated when he was asked about Trump's prevarications on whether Russia had interfered in New Zealand in American elections. Peters himself was similarly non-committal and wouldn't condemn Russia. So, I mean, if any normal Prime Minister in any normal times had done this over the period of 4 weeks, we would think that the country was on the brink of chaos. And I think it's only the fact that there is an end in sight and people see this as a kind of humorous interlude that has avoided sort of mass panic in New Zealand.
I think people nobody wants to stress Jacinda out because she's a new mum, so everyone's being patient. One of the interesting issues that has popped up over the last few weeks, I think, is the Wali Homaha one, and the revelations that he made comments about Shipton and Sholem and voiced his support for them. And I actually think it is an important one, especially in the wake of what we've seen happen with Awanuiarangi Black and the allegations made against him by his wife Anihira Black. And I'm not sure how Wally would be able to involve himself at any level in that case now, having made those sorts of comments. And that's why it is so important that that we look into what happened and what the process was around him being appointed.
And that investigation, which Peters, as acting Prime Minister, was very quick to call, almost immediately as it appeared on the front page of the Herald, he was calling for an inquiry. Part of the reason, I presumably, that it was politically sensitive was that Haumaha had once sought to stand as New Zealand First candidate. Is that right?
It's unclear. It seems as if he announced to friends and family that he was a New Zealand First candidate, and also that he raised funds to run as a New Zealand First candidate, but that he never actually appeared on the ballot. There was a different candidate when the election happened. In terms of his historical comments, obviously what they'll be looking at is whether he's repudiated those, whether he's sort of come to God in the intervening years. I would be surprised if he hadn't. The New Zealand Police, following the Sholem Shipton and Rickard affairs, did engage in a lot of soul-searching about the way that they deal with sexual violence cases and victims. I think there's a bit of a consensus now that they are much better at dealing with those kinds of things within the constraints of a court system that is probably weighed against victims, and sort of baby steps are being made in that regard. Interestingly enough, the not minister but member of the executive who's responsible for looking at those further changes, Jan Logie, passed a private members bill yesterday, which gave people a right to up to 10 days paid leave for domestic violence and abuse per year. Which, one thing that she's a very capable politician, very good in this area, and it does show the sorts of gains that the Greens are slowly making in government, even though over the last 4 weeks they've been completely overshadowed by New Zealand First sort of throwing its weight around and buying warplanes and.
Do you feel as though New Zealand First have made gains, Annabelle, over these sort of 4.5 weeks or so? Do you feel as though, it's quite useful in a way not to see any published polls because we can make some assessments independent of that, but do you, you've got the Ron Marks defence activity, Shane Jones trying to find new ways to describe himself as the champion of the provinces, and Winston being Winston and doing all that sort of stuff. Do you think they've kind of performed?
I think they've performed reasonably. I don't think they've covered themselves in glory, but I also don't think that they've mortally embarrassed themselves either. I think they're just sort of ticking along. Yeah. Doing exactly the sort of things that, you'd expect them to do.
Mm. And look, having Winston in the driver's seat can only be good for the New Zealand First vote. I think New Zealand First, more so than the Greens and more so than Labour, are capable of doing within the coalition that they have, are very concerned with differentiating themselves within that three-party grouping and making clear that Winston Peters as Prime Minister is not just warming a seat for Jacinda Ardern. He and Ron Mark are making, important decisions about defence spending. His comments about China, as you said, did earn a mild rebuke from China, but they weren't off base.
No, that was quite a successfully executed strategy, if that's what it was. It also had remarks in it about Trump, which I think were underplayed a bit. And if you look at that document, the number of times that it talked about rules-based systems, which is could be read as an attack on Trump. Everyone's talking about rules-based systems. It was kind of criticism of all of that. I mean, and I mean, if you read someone like David Capey from Victoria University, his line is that that's what diplomats have been saying for some years anyway. It's much just sort of pushing it through the diplomatic cellophane a bit.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this was the most blunt public document in terms of our relationships with, the two great powers, China and the United States, that I think we've seen for some time now. Maybe that's because diplomatic language has been changed forever, or at least temporarily, by the Trump administration. Gallivanting around the globe, just saying increasingly insane things, and so there's a sort of a lower threshold for for getting comments passed. But yeah, I mean, New Zealand First is playing to its voters. They tend to be cellar dwellers in the period between elections. They rarely ever bump over 5% in polls, until an election year. This will be good for keeping them in the minds of their voters. Obviously before Jacinda went on leave, Winston Peters mercilessly knifed Andrew Little in the back over his announced plans to abolish the three strikes law, and Winston just pulled the rug out from under him, revealing a trap door and a pit full of spikes for him to writhe in pain on. It really was quite excruciating to watch, but all of this is good branding for Peters. So I think it will have helped his core vote and keeping his party relevant. And
you're right in a way. I think we probably overplay the extent to which they kind of want to make a noise and win headlines in these intervening years. Like, sort of come election year, then suddenly it's all on, and they want that attention. In the meantime, they just want to get some stuff in the bank, right? Like, I mean, the main priority, surely, for both the formal coalition partner and the confidence and supply partner, being the Greens, is to get some policy wins and be able to say, look at what we got for you. This works, and then to
I think that New Zealand First are much more concerned. Winston Peters has been in government twice before in a coalition. Both times have ended in disaster from his perspective, and he's constantly learning. After the 1996 formal coalition agreement with National, he innovated and created that much looser arrangement of being a foreign minister outside cabinet in 2005, 2008. He's innovating again here, which is working inside the tent, being a formal member of the government, being in cabinet, being the deputy prime minister, but really signalling to his voters that he's not necessarily on board with everything the government does, and that's come through with everything from Shane Jones's sort of exaggerated eye rolling and yawning during the oil ban announcement in the background, through to knifing Andrew Little on the three strikes, and it
was spikes before. So was it a trap? Is it a knifing, or is it a trapdoor in
there? There was knife on the spikes.
Yeah, knife, carpet, spikes.
Annabelle, the other interesting point of discussion is Simon Bridges' performance during all this. Because there was some talk ahead of it that the strategy was to not go too hard on Winston Peters and to just sort of let things play out. He went on his tour of New Zealand, 70 stops or something, meeting the people in the heartland and cities, blah, blah, blah. How's Simon Bridges doing, do you reckon? What's your report card on Simon Bridges?
I feel like maybe dissing Jacinda's baby didn't work out that good for him.
Right. Yeah.
Even though it was in jest.
Yeah, although, I mean...
Who would have thunk it, though?
I
thought it was a fair play, but no, apparently people don't like it when you go after people's babies. Who knew?
Yeah. Yeah, he must... That was a kind of... There was a tin-eared quality to that, wasn't there? It kind of makes you, in a way, realise what a master of that form John Key was. That, I sort of... I mean, I know maybe it's not cool to feel sorry for somebody who was being mean to a baby, but, going into, where was it, Hauraki or wherever, Alice is nodding, and sort of being about, I'm with the boys, because a little bit of the boys, feeding the chickens, yada, 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 it's like, John Key kind of had a natural affinity with the gawkiness or something.
He did, and I feel he was more sort of self-deprecating in that
right.
regard as well, which probably helped. Yeah, no. And then he got owned by Winston the other day in Parliament as well.
really
It's not
did.
good times for Simon. Simon's doing it tough, but, it's a tough gig he's got.
Speak up
He's
for
up
Simon.
against-
Ben.
I mean, he has the worst job in politics. People say that about the leader of the opposition.
That's a great
It's
line.
the worst job in politics.
The opposition.
But
That's amazing
but
line.
far
I
worse
might
than
use
that is being the leader of the opposition when your party has just been turfed out of power after 9 years. And the Prime Minister has just given birth to a baby. I mean, there is no worse position to be in.
Simon's made babies.
Nobody cares what you think or what you say unless you accidentally insult the baby.
Simon needs to get his babies
No one's
out.
going to listen to me. I can't get a fuck that baby. Now they're listening.
And yeah, that's the point. I mean, his instinct was right. There is value in going around to provincial New Zealand and cities and hitting 80 public meetings. I mean, they said that he had audiences of up to 10,000 people. Now, that's only 0.3% of voters say, but that's a lot of people, and voters will tend to like you more if they've seen you in person. All the feedback that I've heard from national people, obviously, but also journalists, is that he's acquitted himself much better and come across much better in those public meetings than he necessarily does in the media.
I think that's true. I think he's much better in person than he is in front of the media.
Yeah, and he's and at those town halls you get asked about everything, so it's a good kind of training ground for really getting to grips with your policy, having a sense of what people are interested in. I mean, Labour did these tours disastrously in opposition. I think they used to have a big red bus, have a listening tour. I think the worst was Phil Goff's Wild Hogs, Tim Allen style motorcycle trip around the provinces with he and Rick Barker and Annette King's husband all dressed in their leathers and pulling into the Tikawiti Tavern. Just awful. I mean, Simon Bridges is he's avoided the worst of those things, probably taken on the best aspects of getting out and meeting real people. But he was never going to be able to make an impact. If he had stayed in Wellington and just batted up against Winston Peters, even if he had been successful at embarrassing Winston Peters, Peters would be gone in 2 weeks' time, and then Jacinda and the baby would be back. So he was on a hiding to nothing. I think he probably used his time the best that he could, apart from the Hodaki interview.
Yeah, I don't know. I sort of feel like at the same time, whether it's him or generally, a more effective opposition might be pointing up the contradictions between the parties of government, potentially. I don't know. Anyway, the medical cannabis thing is the latest sort of possibly tactical strategic win on National's part. They, at the 11th hour, withdrew support for the government bill, which would semi-legalise cannabis for medicinal use. And then you understand what happened, don't you, Ben? Explain to us what happened.
So what happened is that National decided that they didn't want to support the government's medicinal cannabis bill. They argue that this is because the Labour MPs on the select committee were very tightly bound by what they had promised New Zealand First, who are obviously very conservative on cannabis, and so weren't amenable to the suggestions that submitters and the National Party MPs were making on the bill. Labour argue with that, but it seems to be about right. So they got Dr. Shane Retty, who's a backbencher I knew almost nothing about, and I think Chris Bishop was involved.
He's the one who beat Shane Jones in Whangarei, isn't he? Shane Retty?
He's the Whangarei MP. So he's been in Parliament for a while, and he's a very smart guy, but doesn't have a high profile.
He's the one that left the message on that lady's phone who'd been going to his electric clinic trying to get help or something about the roads.
That might have been Shane Retty.
It was mucho embarrassante.
Probably fair to say he's not known as a master of the political arts, but he's very across public health issues.
He is.
So they said, we're not going to support the government's bill because we can't get these amendments. This created an awkward position for the government because they no longer had the numbers on their Health Select Committee to recommend that the bill is passed. This is a function of the so-called opposition from hell, where Labour or the government doesn't have majorities on a lot of select committees because of the size of the opposition.
Being the biggest party in Parliament.
Being the single biggest party in Parliament, yeah. And that doesn't mean that their bill can't proceed. They've still got numbers in the House as long as New Zealand First and the Greens support it. It does mean it'll be a bit slower because any amendments that they do want to make will have to go through what are they called? Supplementary order papers in the Committee of the Whole House, all technical and boring, but also provides a bit of a PR loss for the government. And worse for the government, and better for the National Party, and hopefully better for medicinal cannabis debate in New Zealand. People like Russell Brown have come out and said actually the National Party bill is better, which I think is probably hugely a bit of a problem.
Fun fact.
Ross Bell from the Drug Foundation as well. Yeah, Russell Brown's piece you can read on the spin-off. Sorry.
Fun fact about that bill is that if you're poor and you need medical marijuana, it's probably not going to do a whole lot for you because it has to be like the sort of mass-produced.
Yeah, it treats it exactly like pharmaceuticals.
So if you're someone who might use like homemade marijuana balm, we did a story about a woman up north who produces balms and salves for people with arthritis. That stuff is still illegal. So for most people, a lot of those products are going to be well beyond their reach.
It does seem like, I mean, the Labour's response, like Louisa Wall is saying, that they're playing political games with something that they're in broad agreement on. It does. I mean, somewhere this is broken down, and I don't know where the blame lies, but it does seem a little bit fucked that they can't work out what the best, given that the two biggest parties in Parliament and the Greens are all pretty well on the same page on this.
Well, where the Labour bill falls down, I think, in national eyes, is first of all, it doesn't actually prescribe any of the regulations that the scheme will operate under. It instead just says there'll be a regulatory body and it will come up with regulations. So I think there's an accusation of vagueness there. There's the issue that Annabelle was talking about. The Labour bill provides for what they've called loose leaf products, or plants for terminal patients to grow and use their own.
But that's the thing too, is it's only for terminal patients. If you have like some debilitating like illness that you have chronic pain, arthritis or whatever, you don't get to use that stuff.
Yeah, and also there's no defence for if somebody is wants to grow their own cannabis plants, at the hospice they're in for their own personal use, doesn't protect the hospice or any of the care workers. So, but it does seem like a flawed bill. Is it playing politics? I mean, in a way it is. National have worked this very well using their numerical advantage as a large opposition. But what they've also done is seemingly produced a better bill. So there was all this talk about, the opposition from hell early on, and people were saying Bill English, who was then the leader, was threatening to sort of gum up the business of government and be obstructive. But what we've actually seen is a lot of these former ministers and a lot of the probably better backbenchers in National have been contributing in a really in what you would have to say objectively is a positive fashion. My old boss Chris Finlayson, his contempt bill, which is a private member's bill, is I think being picked up by the government for the reforms it makes to the law of contempt. Nicky Wagner, some others have bills in that reflect policy they were going to pass, when they were ministers, but never got around to. And here, this seems like a better bill. So obviously there's a political element to it. There were tactics involved in pulling their support and then introducing their own bill. But it also seems to be quite a constructive way of getting better law.
Nurses, strikes.
Actually, could we just go back to Louisa Wall? Because I thought she did very well.
Louisa Wall.
She did well on Morning Report. I don't necessarily think that her stance held up, but she gave a good account of the government's position. And I was thinking about Louisa Wall the other day and thinking just how furious, as an MP of about 11 years standing, I think, just how she must feel when she sees Kelvin Davis or Claire Curran, acting in their capacity as ministers of the Crown, and she's a government backbencher. It really does seem bizarre, given that she's a good performer in the media. She passed the same-sex marriage private members bill from opposition, and got nothing in the carve up of responsibilities for this government.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I've thought that as well. But
Why don't you think it without your fingers in your mouth? It might be clearer.
Sorry. Yeah, I've thought the same thing. I've heard that she's not necessarily good at endearing herself to her colleagues.
Oh, yeah.
But as you say, Ben, that same-sex marriage bill, it's hard to think of anything else in recent history that's been as such a proud moment in Parliament, regardless of what side of the floor you sit on.
It's probably the biggest international array progressive stuff per acclaim globally.
Before the baby.
Before the
BC,
baby came,
The most progressive
BC.
baby in history. There's some chatter that after Jacinda Ardern gets her feet back under the desk, that there'll be a little minor reshuffle. Don't know if you've heard any of that, but one of the things that I heard, which may or may not have any truth to it, is that not Shane Retty, who do I mean? Chris Farfoy is a possibility for broadcasting. I mean,
well, you'd hope so.
Whether or not Claire Curran, who's not had a good few months, I think it's fair to say, in charge of the broadcasting portfolio. I don't know. I mean, Kelvin Davis also has not had a good time, but you can't demote him from deputy leader. That would be so we're agreed. Promotion for Lewis Wall.
Well, I mean, they've actually got quite a lot of. They've actually got a fair bit of talent outside the executive currently, or outside the cabinet ministers and ministers outside of cabinet. Michael Wood, very very accomplished guy. He's only barely a second term MP. He sort of squeaked in a by-election last term. But he's very good, very competent, could handle a step up. Kiri Tapu Allen, I think the sooner they get her involved in serious responsibilities, the better for the party. Deborah Russell's pretty highly rated within the party. And yeah, like I said, Lewis Wall, it's staggering given the performance of some of the ministers that she was overlooked for responsibilities.
Can I also mention Willow Jean Prime, who's excellent as well, and I think that they should be looking to get her into some sort of associate role in terms of treaty settlements or Crown iwi relationships, because she is super smart. She knows what all the issues are. She'd be of great value to them. She's someone who has a lot to contribute.
I mean, the most important thing is that Claire Curran remains as Minister of Open Government to fulfil the promise of the most open and transparent government of all time.
How's that going for you, Annabelle?
Yeah, not really working for us, Toby, to say. Not a whole lot of openness happening at all.
This is the most open government in all history, so...
I know,
it's basically like a sieve.
It's not our experience.
Is it not?
No, absolutely not. It's just as hard to get OYAs answered in their entirety. We put in a request to interview Gronye Moss a couple of months ago. We were told we'd have to wait 6 weeks until the 27th of July, despite it being a really important issue, which is the number of children who were removed from their families as a result of the now debunked meth testing regime, because Housing New Zealand, when tenants failed those tests, they would often notify SIFs. So we tried to get her to talk about that. No, she said she'd come on the 27th, a couple of weeks before. We get an email from her comms person saying that she's no longer available then either. In terms of getting OIAs answered, that's just as hard. So I have to say that when it comes to the rubber hitting the road, we're not seeing a whole lot of transparency.
I've got a solution for that problem, which is in line with the Media Advisory Panel, or whatever they were called, who reportedly, upon learning that their material was provided for release under the Official Information Act, decided to stop taking minutes.
That's right. The last item on the minutes was the committee noted that their minutes would be subject to the Official Information Act, and then it just stopped.
So if all government and government officials and everyone were to just stop writing anything down, then there wouldn't be anything to OIA, and it would be the most open government we've ever seen, because nothing would ever have to be refused. It's just an idea.
It's just make the Beehive like one of those, buildings in a comedy where there's just been an earthquake or something, where the side comes off, and you sort of see into all of the.
Like one of those jigsaw puzzles.
Yeah. And you might see somebody in a bathroom or something, but mostly you would just hear people discussing important matters of state.
You can pay Ben for that advice if you just look up exceltium.co.nz or .ru or whoever pays for it. I don't know. The nurses we're getting to strikes, the winter of discontent. Is it how the nurses seemingly might be on the verge of agreeing? The unions have advised them to go for the new offer from the DHBs, but is it a case of Labour appearing a soft touch? Is it a case of the seal breaking after years of parsimonious government? It's quite a major issue for the Labour government.
It is, and I do feel some sympathy for them, because, this is when, after years and years of under-resourcing, it tends to happen when a Labour government comes in, everybody hits the picket line, knowing that they've got a much better chance of driving through some of those increases, and so it always tends to be a bit of a tough start for Labour in terms of health, teaching, those sorts of issues, and I think that's what we're seeing again, and those nurses are driving a hard bargain, and good on them.
Yeah, it's like an avalanche. In the dying stages of the last national government, the finishing touches were put on that settlement with care workers who had been underpaid for a long time. Then other care workers, mental health care workers, said, well, we're doing the same job, why don't we get a pay rise as well? So I think that was just signed off this week. And then nurses will start to say, midwives as well got a bump, a while ago, and then the other midwives who weren't covered by those agreements got a bump in the budget. Then nurses start to say, well, look, we've got to keep this comparative. We haven't had pay rise in a long time. Then teachers, police are currently in negotiation as well. And so it all kind of snowballs, people start to see that, a rising tide lifts all boats, and so people are pretty keen to get into the water in that case.
When their boat?
No, they are the boat, and then they get into the water because they see that the water is lifting all the boats.
But in the boat, in the water in their boat, they've all just to go straight into the water.
They go straight into the water. If they're a
Some of
boat,
them
if they're
on
in a
jet
boat,
skis.
then they take the boat onto the water.
Yeah.
But
Well,
essentially, what I'm
surfboards.
saying is that more
It's a
people,
global warming thing.
more people are getting involved in industrial action because they've got a greater claim, because they can point to other people who are getting pay rises, and there is a greater expectation that if other people are sharing in what we might call the social dividend of years of growth in a higher tax take, then they should be sharing in that as well.
It's a great point. We're running out of time. Let's talk briefly about the end of the Opportunities Party. Gareth Morgan announced issue to the last rights.
Did he? Have they finished? Have they gone?
They're
Oh,
done.
shit.
Yeah.
Didn't know. No, that sucks.
That's some great analysis. Thank you, Annabelle.
Well,
Ben.
strong counterpoint. It doesn't suck. It's fine.
Great. I think we covered that one off nicely. Te Urua Flavel has stood down as co-leader of the Māori Party. Did you notice that, Annabelle?
I did. He's actually taking over from my darling. My darling has left Te Wānanga o Aotearoa. He's been the CEO there for the last 5 years. My betrothed,
Your betrothed,
who
yeah.
I'm marrying tomorrow.
Getting married tomorrow. We're all going to be there. Not
Everyone's
invited.
coming. The
But we're all
whole
going.
of the Motu. Neve's my flower girl. I was going to keep it as a surprise for you guys on the day. But
Is she?
Jacinda has kindly agreed to let Neve be my
Is
flower
she going
baby.
to, is she going to walk down?
You can
the aisle?
RSVP
No,
for
she's
the
gonna roll down
ceremony
the
She's going to roll down the aisle.
at Hui Hopper on Twitter.
I'm keen to record a special episode of our Point Chev Cafes podcast tomorrow during the ceremony. What time is it?
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock.
10:30.
What's the address?
10 o'clock, 10:30.
10:30 o'clock.
Okay,
It is.
we'll start preloading at 6. You're in, Alice? Yeah, it's going to be huge. We're just talking before, we're going to get a drone to drop some shit. Water cannons.
Awesome.
It's going to be amazing. Do let Jim know that we're coming.
I will.
He'll be
I will.
excited
I will.
to hear that.
He'll be over the moon.
Look, the last thing that is on this list really for the reunion tour is this confounded free speech thing. I don't even want to talk about it. Do you want to talk about it, Ben? Do you want to talk about it, Annabelle?
You know what? Just exercising my free speech. I can't be fucked talking about it, Toby. Anymore?
Ben, should we let Ben talk and we'll fade out over the... So, Ben, you just begin and then we'll just fade out at some point when it becomes...
My only interest in this is that I think some people have conflated this idea that nobody is required to provide a platform with the requirement for government and local government to be neutral. People talk about the need to have somebody in speaker's corner. You know, the government can't stop you from getting up in a park and speaking. And we've got a similar sort of situation here where essentially a town hall, for anyone who can pay for it, should be the speaker's corner. So it's not right to say that Phil Goff can ban people from council venues just because he's a guy who happens to own a lot of venues. That's because he's the mayor. Did we fade out?
Oh, no.
Oh, we keep
I don't know. I wasn't. No, it's a fair. It's a good point.
But it
was quite cheeky for him to say it's a health and safety issue after the fact.
I mean, we don't know how it played out. Whether it was already banned, whether it had already been cancelled as a health and safety issue, and then Goff just jumped on, deciding that he'd score cheap political points by pretending he had banned it, or whether he sort of gave a nudge and a wink, and to the Auckland Council to boot them out of the venue. And we probably wouldn't get to the bottom of that during a trial. And I think these things are a bit self-correcting, really.
Please, last word, Annabelle Lee.
About free speech.
Oh, anything you like, really.
It's your last day of freedom.
It's my last day of freedom.
Cut loose.
I would just like to make a plea to Phil Twyford and Tracy Martin to please encourage your ministries to answer our OIAs. I think using the excuse that it's too labour intensive to find out how many children have ended up in state care as a result of notifications from Housing New Zealand is really piss poor, and they're all our tamariki, and you would think that everyone would want to know that information. So please, if you could encourage your ministries to answer that would be wonderful.
Preach. Annabelle Lee, thank you, Ben Thomas, thank you, Alice. If you are so desperate that you've managed to stay on this long, you'll probably also be delighted to hear that we now have a food podcast. What's it called? Dietary Requirements. I thought it should have been called Mean Feeds. I thought that would have, but that didn't even, I put that in the works like it was total tumbleweed. That's available on all usual platforms with our other host of podcasts. Thanks a lot very much. We'll be better organised and we'll be more prompt next time, I promise.
Which is what, 2019?
I'm Toby Manhire and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.